captivated audiences since their initial arrest in 1990. Two wealthy and educated young men killing their parents in a quiet Beverly Hills suburb that averaged 2 homicides a year was scandalous. However, public opinion about the brothers and their crime have shifted in recent years, partially due to Peacock's docuseries about the occurrence that was released in 2023. Today, I'm going to be taking you through the lives of Kitty and Jose Menendez, their deaths, the trials of Lyle and Erik Menendez, and public opinion surrounding the whole ordeal. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Crafty Crimes podcast. This week, I'm going to be finishing this crop top that I started at work. I'm modifying the pattern just a bit so that it fits my style a little better, but I'll link the original pattern in the description. This is what the front looks like. I'm going to be finishing the back panel and then the sleeves, and then I'm going to come down and do the trim, which is this part right here. And while I do that, we're going to discuss the Menendez brothers case. There was a lot more to this story than I initially thought, and even what I remembered hearing when I watched podcasts on it, however long ago that was. I'm actually pretty excited to share my thoughts and opinions about this case with you. I was left bamboozled at every turn. It is full of so many twists, and it's a scandal within a scandal and within a scandal. I'd also love to hear from you and what you guys think about it. I want to know your thoughts, your opinions, if you think they should be released, if you think they shouldn't be released, all of it. I want to hear it. And not only will we be talking about the case, but the Menendez brothers' story isn't over yet. And we're going to be talking about that as well, but we'll get into that at the very end of the episode. So, for now, I want you to get comfy and grab your crafting supplies with me. Our story starts with the blonde-haired, green eyes, Kitty Anderson. Kitty was born as Mary Louise to Charles and May Anderson on October 14th, 1941, as the youngest of 4 children. Her father was a small business owner and ran his own heating and cooling practice, while her mother was a homemaker. This dynamic was not uncommon during this time period, and the family seemed to live a nice, quiet, middle-class life, at least for a little while. But despite their cozy lives, the family had a big problem. Behind closed doors, it said that Charles regularly beat May in front of the children and even beat the children sometimes as well. Charles would abandon the family for another woman before Kitty even entered elementary school, and that forced May to take a job as a flight attendant to provide for her family. May never remarried and remained bitter about her divorce. Kitty would be considered withdrawn and quiet in school, and given her home life, I can see why. Knowing that Kitty was likely abused by her father makes some things later in this story make a lot of sense. And I know that statement is a little bit confusing, but we'll get there. Just bear with me. By 1960, she was enrolled at Southern Illinois University, where she fell in love with broadcasting. Like most teens, Kitty viewed college as a fresh start in life, and she actually quickly became popular. Her involvement with the broadcasting club contributed to her active social life. During her senior year, Kitty Anderson met the 19-year-old Jose Menendez on campus and became infatuated. She would graduate with a BS in communications around 1963. Jose Menendez was born on May 6, 1944, in Havana, Cuba, to famous soccer player and accountant Jose Francisco Menendez and Hall of Fame swimmer Maria Carlotta. He was the youngest of 3 children and by all accounts was absolutely adored by his parents. However, in 1960, Jose's parents would send him away. Political unrest and increasing poverty rates in Cuba, thanks to the takeover of Fidel Castro, left the family uncertain of their future. In a bid to spare their son, Jose was sent with his sister Teresita's fiancé to the United States. The brothers would settle in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. When Jose arrived in the U.S., he didn't speak any English, at all. But he worked hard and managed to graduate high school while working a part-time job. His parents would both leave Cuba separately and both arrive in 1961. Through his efforts, Jose managed to get an athletic scholarship to the Southern Illinois University, where he would be on the swim team. It's said that Jose hated SIU and was disappointed in himself for not making it into an Ivy League school. However, his life changed when he met Kitty Anderson on campus. He was a freshman during her senior year, but the two hit it off immediately, and soon they became inseparable. And neither one's family really cared for the other one. Jose's family didn't like Kitty because she came from a divorced family, and Kitty's family didn't like Jose because he was Cuban. Kitty and Jose would secretly elope in 1963, shortly after Kitty graduated college. After getting married, the couple would move to New York so that Jose could attend Queens College. Kitty quickly gave up her aspirations of being a radio show producer to support Jose and his dreams, becoming a school teacher while Jose finished his studies. Jose would graduate from Queens College with a degree in accounting in 1967, clearly trying to follow in his own father's footsteps. After graduation, the family would move to New Jersey and Jose would get his CPA license. From here, Jose worked a variety of jobs and quickly rose through the ranks at nearly all of them, but the most notable of his employers was Hertz and RCA Records, where he would work as an executive. These jobs gave him countless connections to the music industry, including to Roy Roseo of the Latin boy band Muendo. In a 2023 docuseries released on Peacock entitled Boys Betrayed, Roseo complains that Jose drugged him and raped him as a teenager. Additionally, Jose had a reputation for being a hard-ass and abusing his employees, but it's not explicitly stated how he abused his employees. But I just want you to keep these character references in mind as we go forward. The couple welcomed their first child, Joseph Lyle Menendez, on January 10th, 1968. Kitty was 27 and Jose was 24. Just a year after Lyle was born, the family moved to Hinsdale, Illinois, because Jose had taken a job with Lion Container Company. By 1970, Jose had been fired from the company, and the family would move back to New Jersey in 1971. The Menendezes welcomed their second son, Eric Galen, on November 27th, shortly after their return to the East Coast. The family would remain in New Jersey for the next 15 years, and Jose would work a lucrative job at RCA Records while Kitty was a devoted stay-at-home mother. Professionally, Jose had a reputation for saving dying companies and turning them into profitable powerhouses. Jose specifically worked incredibly hard to overcome the odds and live the classic American dream. And, as a couple, the Menendezes faced a lot of ridicule for being interracial in the 1960s. Yet, despite being a power couple, the marriage was incredibly flawed. Jose was domineering and called the shots in the family, and he also carried on numerous affairs throughout the years. When Kitty found out, she spiraled into a deep depression and threatened to commit suicide. And really, I have to wonder if Jose's chronic affairs contributed to the family's move across the country in 1986. If you're wondering why I took the last however many minutes to talk about Kitty and Jose instead of the brothers, it's because I feel like their stories are relevant. In order for you to understand why the parricide committed by Lyle and Erik was so scandalous, we need to know who Jose and Kitty were as people. This is one of those cases where you can't separate the victims from the perpetrators simply because all the information is relevant. So, now that we have an idea of how the family came to be and a bit of their dynamic, let's talk about the two y'all came to hear about, Lyle and Erik Menendez. I'd like to sit here and tell you that Lyle and Erik were spoiled growing up, and in some sense they probably were, but Jose's domineering personality didn't stop with his career or his aspirations. He brought it home. Jose had big dreams of his sons attending an Ivy League college and becoming top business executives, but with much less of the struggles that he himself had to face. And to be fair, I think it's perfectly normal to want better for your children than what you had. But Jose happened to go about it in the worst way possible. Instead of teaching his sons about the value of hard work, he ruled with an iron fist in an attempt to make them nepo babies, basically. From a young age, Jose insisted on talking about current events with the children at the dinner table. Lyle, being the eldest, took the brunt of his father's control. Jose had a hand in everything, telling the children who they could and couldn't be friends with, when and what they could play, and any extracurriculars that they participated in. He insisted that both boys pick a sport not only to play, but to excel at, and both boys picked tennis. No part of their lives was to be kept secret from Jose, and not a moment was to go unaccounted for. The boys grew up under immense pressure to succeed, and as a result, they had no clue how to handle disappointment and had fiery tempers. In 1986, the family made a drastic change. Jose left his job as an executive for RCA Records in New York to take a position with Carlucco in Los Angeles. Initially settling in Calabasas, the family would eventually buy a $4 million home. It was a 23-room Mediterranean-style mansion in Beverly Hills that had previously been rented out to the likes of Prince and Elton John. It quickly rose through the ranks at Carlucco. God, that is so hard to say, I'm sorry. And in 1988 became the director for live entertainment. His studio produced a few big-name movies, most notably the Rambo series. Lyle, being 18 and getting ready for college, did not join the rest of the family on the West Coast. Lyle applied to Princeton University in 1986 and, not being a good student, was initially rejected. This didn't bother Lyle in the slightest. He wasn't interested in attending college and instead had dreams of opening a restaurant with his father's financial backing. Jose, however, was not satisfied with this outcome. So Lyle applied for and briefly attended a community college in Princeton, New Jersey. While he attended the community college, Lyle met and fell in love with waitress Jamie. Jamie was 5 years older than Lyle and a tennis player. And the family didn't like her because they thought she was only dating Lyle for the family money. But Lyle was infatuated with Jamie regardless. Lyle had put in a second application to Princeton and had been accepted in 1987. Sources say that his ethnic background and aptitude in tennis earned him a place at the prestigious university. However, knowing the type of person Jose is and how badly he wanted his sons to have an Ivy League education, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Jose offered some sort of financial compensation in return for his son attending the university. Lyle, however, was less than thrilled with this new fortune of his. You see, Jamie had decided that she was going to be moving to Alabama to teach tennis, and Lyle wanted to go with her. Jose sponsored Jamie on a European tennis tour, hoping that Lyle would stay behind. Lyle did not and followed Jamie to Europe. Lyle finally did attend Princeton in the fall of 1987. Before his first semester was over, Lyle would be suspended from the college for plagiarism and was told he could return to the school in good academic standing the following year. Obviously, Princeton takes their code of ethics very seriously. Despite Jose's best attempts to intervene on Lyle's behalf, Lyle left Princeton for the year and flew to California to be with his family. This interaction is very telling to me about the dynamics between the siblings and Jose, and it's part of the reason I suspect Jose paid Princeton a hefty sum to let Lyle in. Lyle was willing to lie and cheat his way through college and didn't fear the repercussions because he was so used to Daddy's money solving his problems, and he was just blind to how incredibly lucky he was. And likewise, Jose was used to paying off whoever it took to get his boys out of trouble, and we'll actually see more of that later in this story, and it has led to nothing but trouble for everyone involved. Anyways, with Lyle out of school and back in California, Jose put his eldest son to work in his company. Lyle was meant to review fiscal reports and look for ways to make the company more profitable and efficient. Lyle would be remembered by his coworkers as arrogant, self-centered, and just downright nasty. It's said that he often showed up late or skipped work altogether for no reason, really, just because the sun was shining, basically. And he was just generally pretty terrible at his job. And after receiving a few complaints, Jose had no choice but to fire his son. In the fall of 1988, Lyle moved back to New Jersey to attend Princeton University again. He was shocked to find out that he would be having a roommate this year. His roommate, Donovan Goodrow, would become his good friend and testify at his trial in the coming years. Sometime that year, Lyle and Jamie would call it quits. Donovan would do Lyle's homework for him, and Lyle continued to skate by on someone else's efforts and use his father's dime. Jose was undeniably a terrible person and a terrible father, and it seems Lyle turned out the same way. The lack of accountability and lengths Lyle is willing to go to in order to avoid getting in trouble is astounding, and you'll see more of that soon enough. In 1989, Lyle began to date a 30-year-old model named Crafty, and this relationship upset Kitty and Jose more than the last one. And honestly, I think pissing off his parents was Lyle's goal. I mean, who among us has not dated someone at some point to make our parents mad? I know I did. It's no big deal. Everyone does it. It was rumored, though, that Crafty became pregnant with Lyle's child that summer, and Jose paid her $100,000 to have an abortion and leave their lives for good. That same year, Donovan and Lyle would have a falling out when Donovan was accused of stealing from other boys in the dorm hall. Donovan maintained his innocence, but Lyle and some of his jock friends strong-armed Donovan out of the dorm hall. In his haste to gather his things and leave, Donovan left his wallet, which contained all his identifying information, behind in Lyle's room. And to me, this really shows how shitty of a person Lyle was. Donovan had been doing Lyle's homework to keep him from flunking out of college, and Lyle turned around and betrayed Donovan as soon as it was convenient. So the shitty apple doesn't fall far from the shitty tree. Without Donovan's help, Lyle would be placed on academic probation for failing his classes and would receive disciplinary action for damaging school property during a party. In response, Jose bought Lyle a condo in Princeton to encourage him to continue his studies, because that's what you do when your offspring is being a menace to society. You buy him a condo. Now, before we get into the murders, let's back up a bit and learn a bit more about Erik Menendez. While Lyle felt the immense pressure to be successful and follow in his father's footsteps, Erik felt abandoned and alone. Like Lyle, his grades in school were average at best, but he excelled at tennis. To keep her boys from flunking out of school, it said that Kitty often did their homework, which once again set the boys up to have no sense of accountability or responsibility. Erik was a sophomore in high school when the family made the move to California, and shockingly, the move actually seemed to be a good thing for Erik. He quickly made a group of like-minded friends and got his first girlfriend, though that specific relationship was short-lived because Erik was pretty emotionally abusive towards this girl. The most significant relationship Erik formed, though, was with Craig Signorelli, the captain of the Calabasas High School tennis team. The boys became the best of friends and would write a screenplay together about a teenager who kills his parents to get their $157 million life insurance policy. This screenplay would not be the only time Erik references media regarding a teen boy killing his wealthy father. During one of his trials, a friend leaked an audio tape of Erik wanting to form his own billionaire boys club. This idea came from a TV miniseries that played in 1987. While on the stand, he would say that he just really liked the show and the idea was meant to be a joke, like one of those things you just say when you're with your friends that has no substance and is more of a hypothetical than anything. Regardless, in retrospect, I find these facts to be alarming and very telling of the actual motive behind the murders. Please bear with me because we will get there soon, I promise. In the summer of 1988, both Lyle and Erik started breaking into Calabasas homes and burglarizing them. In total, they would steal around $100,000 worth of cash and jewelry. The pair was caught when an officer pulled Erik over for a traffic violation and noticed some of the stolen goods in the car. And of course, Jose intervened to keep the kids out of trouble. With the help of a good criminal defense attorney, the brothers were able to take a plea deal that allowed Lyle's record to stay clean as long as Erik took the fall. This worked because Erik was a minor at the time and he was sentenced to community service. And both brothers were ordered to undergo psychiatric treatment with Dr. Jerome Ozell, which is an insanely good deal because otherwise the pair would have been brought up on felony charges. Once again, Daddy's money saved the day and made their problems go away. Their motive for robbing their friends' family was to have spending money without having to ask their father for it. Several New Jersey office buildings were also burglarized in April of 1988 while Lyle was attending Princeton. The office building just so happened to be on the same property as the Menendez's previous home in New Jersey, which is how they were able to connect Lyle to the break-ins. After the boys had been caught for the burglaries, Jose and Kitty were forced to sell their Calabasas home and move to Beverly Hills to that large mansion I mentioned earlier. The community now no longer trusted the family, and Jose claims that they were being harassed, and honestly, I kind of hope they were. When you are this shitty of a person and raise your kids to be equally as shitty, you kind of can't expect the community that you take advantage of to be welcoming towards you. It was this event, though, mixed with Lyle's shenanigans in New Jersey, that led Kitty and Jose to make the threat of revising their will to leave their sons nothing if they died. Erik graduated from high school in 1989 and awaited his freshman year at UCLA. He had plans to join the tennis team and participated in tournaments over the summer. He seemed to be a decent enough player. In the weeks leading up to the murders, things in the Menendez home were tense. Kitty had confided to her own therapist that she was worried her sons were sociopaths. In her paranoia, she refused to let the boys have keys to the family home, insisting that she had to let them into the house herself. She also began to lock the door to her room at night. On the night of August 20th, 1989, everything finally came to a head. The years of pressure the boys felt from their father came crashing down around them, and the fear of losing the luxurious lifestyle they were used to caught up to them. This night would change their lives forever. When Lyle and Erik entered the family home that night, they were armed with two 12-gauge shotguns that they had bought using Donovan Goodrow's ID. They made their way to the back of the house where their parents sat watching a James Bond movie. One of the brothers opened fire and shot Jose in the back of the head, blowing part of his skull off. Kitty sprang up to run away, but slipped in Jose's blood. She was shot in the arm, the leg, and the lung. The boys then ran outside to Lyle's car, reloaded their guns with birdshot, and entered the home. When they walked back into the family room, Kitty was still alive. One of her sons put a shotgun to her cheek and fired, finally killing her. The brothers then shot their dead parents in the left knee. Kitty was shot 10 times in total, and Jose was shot 6. She was standing close enough to her attackers that the ball bearings from the shotgun shattered the bones in her leg and smashed her skull into pieces. Jose was 44 and Kitty was 47. The Menendez brothers then did their best to clean up the mess, picking up shell casings and washing some of the blood off their hands and face. Lyle then called 911 and reported his parents dead, saying that someone drove by and killed them. When police arrived on scene, they discovered the brothers in hysterics, and thus the investigation begins. Initially, one of the leads the police decided to follow was the idea of a mob hit. When Jose was working in Hollywood with other production teams, the police figured that it was likely that someone somewhere had crossed paths with a mob member at some point and something went south. This lead was reaffirmed by the death of an adult film producer, Theodore Snyder, who was also shot with a shotgun in his home just like 2.5 weeks prior. And allegedly, a white hatchback was seen outside the homes around the times of the murders in both cases. Ted, by the way, was the producer for over 70 adult films, a good chunk of which featured his wife, Sharon. When you look at it from the perspective of the police, you can sort of see why they thought the murders were connected. Both men were producers in the entertainment industry. Both had been killed in their homes with a shotgun, and the same car was seen near both homes. That's quite a few coincidences in just a 19-day span. However, Ted Snyder and his wife Sharon both had a coke habit. Their coke dealer, Victor Diaz, was arrested for the murder after he confessed to police that he had killed Snyder for a chance to be with his wife, Sharon. Mrs. Snyder then went on trial for conspiracy to commit murder and was acquitted. And all of that to say that Kitty and Jose did not have a coke habit, so it would have been highly unlikely for both individuals to be killed by the same person. Los Angeles as a whole was unimpressed with the Beverly Hills Police Department. The Los Angeles Times questioned the BHPD's ability to solve a high-profile case like this one, especially when their last homicide was still unsolved. Many felt that the police force of a town that averaged 2 homicides a year was ill-equipped to handle a professional hit from the mob. While the police were busy with press conferences and investigating the murders of Kitty and Jose Menendez, Lyle and Erik were living the high life. In the 6 months before they were apprehended, the brothers spent somewhere between $700,000 and $1.1 million, most of which came from Jose's life insurance policy. Lyle bought 3 Rolexes, a Porsche, and a chicken wing restaurant in New Jersey, while Erik would pay to enter tennis tournaments and travel. The two would abandon the $4 million mansion altogether and go to live in adjoining condos near Marina del Rey. I was wondering why the detail about the Rolexes was important, because I figured a watch couldn't possibly cost that much. I was operating under the assumption that a high-end watch was like $500 max, and boy oh boy was I wrong. On average, one Rolex can cost like $12,000. My flappers are gasted, okay? $12,000 for a watch? A watch? Get out of here. And you bought 3 and a Porsche? Get out of here. Get out of here. Okay. Anyways, the police were watching the Menendez brothers as well. You see, when someone stands to inherit a large life insurance policy, it automatically puts them on the suspect list, and the brothers' spending spree did not help their public image in this case. Additionally, police had discovered that Kitty's personal computer had been wiped professionally before they could admit it into evidence. Kitty and Jose's murders likely would have gone cold if it weren't for a taped confession the police received. If you remember, the duo had been caught the previous summer committing burglaries around Calabasas and had been ordered to seek psychiatric help as part of a plea deal. Dr. Jerome Ozell took them on as patients and had been seeing them since. In 2 separate taped sessions, the brothers admitted to killing their parents and threatened Dr. Ozell, his wife Laurel, and his colleague and affair partner, Judalon Smith. We are going to talk about these tapes more in just a minute, though. Dr. Ozell wasn't the only person who had some kind of confession from Erik. Craig Signorelli, one of Erik's high school friends, came forward to tell the police about the play the two had written about a trust fund boy who murdered his family to get his inheritance early. And, in addition to the screenplay, Craig had gone to visit Erik and Lyle at the mansion shortly after the murders. During this visit, Craig claims that Erik confessed to the murders to him. Police were hesitant about this confession, though, so they convinced Craig to see Erik again while wearing a wire to try to see if they, would talk about it again. When the two went to dinner, just as planned, Erik told Craig that he had been just kidding before. The case would have gone cold here, too. The police had tried in vain to find the murder weapons, which the boys had already thrown off a cliff near the San Fernando Valley the night of the murders. They tried to locate the shop where the brothers had bought the shotguns, but over 80 pages of names and locations landed on the detective's desk. Plus, the brothers had used someone else's ID to buy the gun in the first place, so the police wouldn't have been able to find them on the lists to begin with. And finally, the audio tapes from the session with Dr. Ozell came to the investigators. 17 audio tapes and 7 pages of notes on the Menendez's sessions were turned over by Judalon Smith. Miss Smith decided to turn the tapes over to police after she had felt threatened by the brothers while recording one of their sessions. On November 2nd, 1989, she overheard them confess to killing their parents and then heard Lyle make a threat to Dr. Ozell and herself. Dr. Ozell, being the idiot that he was, had already decided that he wasn't going to report the threat, but thankfully Judalon did. If she hadn't have turned the tapes over when she did, Lyle and Erik likely wouldn't have been caught. On March 8, 1990, Lyle was arrested outside of the Beverly Hills mansion. Lyle must have known this was coming because he had already given his friend, Glenn Stevens, the business card for the lawyer that got him off the burglary charge and $40,000 to bail him out of jail. Police ambushed Lyle on his way to lunch, blocking him in on Elm Drive. In a press conference held later that night, the LA County District Attorney's Office announced that they believed the official motive was greed and that the Menendez brothers could face the death penalty if they were convicted. Upon hearing the news of his brother's arrest, Erik flew back to the United States. He had been in Israel at the time for tennis tournaments. Erik was arrested on March 11, 1990 at the Los Angeles airport. He had been accompanied to LA from Miami by his aunt and Jose's sister, Marta Cano. It wasn't until after the release of the audio tapes and the pair's arrest that the police were able to get physical evidence tying them to the murder. Thanks to the audio tapes surrendered by Judalon Smith, the police knew the general location of where the guns were dumped. They were also able to question Donovan Goodrow, whose ID had been used in San Diego to buy 2 firearms when he was somehow working his shift in New Jersey. His time card at work corroborated his alibi, and the signature on his ID didn't match the signed buyers released from the gun store. Though Erik refused to provide the police with a handwriting sample, the police believed that it was Erik who signed for the guns. The family of the Menendez brothers have given their unwavering support since the beginning. The Andersons and Menendezes both paid for the brothers' attorneys. Erik was represented by the formidable Leslie Abramson. Leslie had a reputation as a theatrical defender who was staunchly against the death penalty. This was her 15th high-profile case. Lyle was represented by Jill Lansing. Jill was fresh off the public defender circuit and had yet to take on a high-profile case. Pam Bozanik was chosen to be the prosecutor, along with DA Ira Rayner. Bozanik had just finished prosecuting the retrial for the McMartin preschool molestations, another infamous case from the 1980s. The hiring of a good defense attorney for Erik and not Lyle suggests to me that the family knew in part, some way, somehow, that it was Erik who had fired the killing shots, but that's just speculation on my part. The brothers acted aloof during their arraignment. Judge Stein noted that the brothers acted smug and arrogant and paid an inappropriate amount of attention to the friends and family that came and gathered in the gallery. Both Lyle and Erik pled not guilty to multiple murder, and the judge had expressly stated during the arraignment that they could be facing the death penalty. It was obvious to the spectators present that day that neither brother felt any remorse for what they had done. By June 3, 1990, the appeals process had already begun. The tapes that had been provided to police by Judalon Smith were called into question over the statutes for doctor-patient confidentiality. Over the next 2 months, the judge heard arguments from both counsels about whether or not the audio tapes were admissible. On August 8, 1990, Judge Stein decided that 2 out of the 17 surrendered tapes were not covered under any confidentiality agreement. The tape from October 31st, where Erik had confessed to Ozell during a session that he and Lyle had killed their parents, was allowed because Lyle had threatened Ozell and his wife Laurel during that session. A tape from November 2nd was also allowed to be used as evidence because Lyle had repeated his threat towards Dr. Ozell. This ruling was taken to the California Supreme Court, and the decision was upheld there. In addition to the threats made against the providers, they determined that confidentiality had been broken before Mrs. Smith had submitted the tapes to the police. Jerome Ozell had relayed to his wife and Miss Smith the threats made against them by the Menendez brothers on separate occasions outside of work. Because the information had been surrendered freely on separate occasions and not as a duty of the job, confidentiality had already been breached, making them admissible in court. Now, the police hadn't fully compiled their case against Lyle and Erik at the time of their arrest. Apprehending them before they had more than a secretly taped confession seems risky to me, but I'm not law enforcement, so what do I know? For the next 3 years, Erik and Lyle were housed at the Los Angeles County Men's Jail awaiting trial. This jail is nearly famous on its own, having housed other serious offenders like Richard Ramirez. They were kept separated in a block that housed high-profile inmates. Erik reportedly broke down almost immediately. Within his first week, he was given Xanax to manage his anxiety and began weekly counseling sessions with a psychiatrist. It's also suspected, or rumored, that Erik was caught receiving oral sex from another inmate. To me, this is no big deal, it's whatever. But prior to the move to California, Kitty had been worried that Erik was gay, and I guess that was a lot bigger deal in 1988 than it is now. Lyle, on the other hand, and quite frankly, unsurprisingly, was nothing but a menace. It's said that Lyle often capitalized on the phone in his cell block, spending an inordinate amount of time making phone calls, most to the manager of the wing restaurant that he had bought. He would also bully other inmates by taunting them and stealing their food. It's also said that early in his incarceration, Lyle had been caught trying to escape from prison. He had drawn the layout of a prison with a written detailed letter to Erik about his plan to escape to the Middle East to avoid extradition. Their trials would begin in 1993, with each brother being tried concurrently with separate juries. Judge Stanley Weisberg, who had presided over the Rodney King case a year prior, was the sitting judge for this trial as well. The selection of both juries was the first indication that some sexual abuse may be involved in the case. There were a total of 15 questions on the juror selection questionnaire that involved sexual assault, which, to my understanding, only happens in cases where that is a present theme. However, no one knew that this would be the key defense for the brothers until June 9th, 1993, at the pretrial hearing. The basis for the defense's claims were rocky at best. The only thing they had to support this claim is the word of the brothers, which, if you remember, isn't the most reliable. They had lied about committing murder, after all. Erik's attorney, Leslie Abramson, decided to try to sway public opinion for the brothers as victims of physical abuse at the hands of Jose in a press conference she held on July 17th, 1993, just 3 days before the trial was set to begin. She had the brothers wear boyish sweaters and khakis to their trial in an attempt to alter the jury's perception of them. The brothers dropped their arrogance and behaved more appropriately for their official trial. The court proceedings were televised. The defense's entire case relied on the brothers' allegations of physical and sexual abuse, saying that the brothers grew up afraid of their controlling father. The final tipping point for the murders came when Lyle had heard Erik say that Jose had been raping him, Erik, as well. They killed Jose in retribution for the abuse, and they killed their mother to avoid leaving a witness and as revenge for never stopping their father's abuse. The murder was painted to be a moment of intense passion and emotion, constituting a verdict of manslaughter and not murder. The prosecution called 26 witnesses to the stand in order to establish the brothers' characters. As we can see from their previous criminal record and the way they treated the people around them, they were pretty shitty people. They were able to use these witnesses to establish that Lyle and Erik had premeditated the murders and that there was a lot of evidence to support that. Ultimately, both juries would come back deadlocked, so the Menendezes would have to face trial again. The father's side of the family came to all of their court proceedings. The second trial started in October of 1995 with Judge Weisberg deciding that the brothers would be charged by a single jury this time. And, other than Erik's attorney, the individuals involved in the trial changed. The Menendez estate had run out of money by this time, so Lyle used a public defender, and Erik's attorney, Leslie, was now being paid for by the taxpayers. It was decided pretty early on that this trial would not be televised. The new prosecuting attorney, Carol Kahn, convinced the judge to bar the mention of battered person syndrome, completely eliminating the defense's strategy. This happened in part because of Lyle, who had been caught asking a cousin and a friend to lie on the stand for them. The defense teams would stick with the physical abuse strategy, while the prosecution would focus on the money spent after the murders as the motive. The defense would outline years of physical abuse towards the brothers. Erik would take the stand for 15 days, detailing what it was like for him growing up. Erik, having suffered several breaks in his mental health since the murders took place, was the ideal candidate to put on the stand. The defense was able to use his story to make the argument that the boys had acted in self-defense and were under extreme distress from years of abuse. Andreas Cano, a Menendez cousin, testified that Erik had told him that Jose had begun giving him, once again Erik, genital massages starting at age 6. Cano also testified that he and his cousin had conversations 3 to 4 more times over the years. Donovan Goodrow, Lyle's old Princeton roommate, also testified, saying that he had confessed to Lyle that he had been molested as a kid. He claims Lyle's eyes filled with tears, but the future murderer wouldn't say anything at this time. Donovan, however, would prove to be an unreliable narrator. While he had testified during one of the trials that Lyle hadn't said anything about enduring sexual abuse over that bonding dinner they shared in Princeton, he would say in an interview for a freelance journalist in 1992 that Lyle had admitted that both he and Erik had been sexually assaulted by Jose as children. The prosecution came down hard this time, playing the confession tapes from Dr. Ozell, the 911 calls, and outlining the spending spree. Kahn was able to successfully build a case for agreed killing, and without the child sexual assault defense, the Menendez brothers were unable to find a sympathetic jury. After 4 days of deliberation, on March 20th, 1996, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. The brothers were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. This same jury would choose between the death penalty and life without parole during the penalty phase. During the second week of the penalty phases, however, the prison psychiatrist that Erik had been seeing, Dr. Vickery, admitted to the courts that he had doctored his notes at the behest of Leslie Abramson, Erik's defense lawyer. Lyle's defense attorney called for a mistrial, but Judge Weisberg ruled that Erik's co-counsel, Barry Levine, was capable of handling the case. This was not the only scandal to arise from Erik's counsel. It was rumored that Leslie Abramson and Erik Menendez were involved in an inappropriate relationship, but the rumor died and nothing arose from the scandal. The jury ended deliberation for sentencing on July 3, 1996. Lyle and Erik Menendez were given life without the possibility of parole. The brothers were taken to separate prisons in California and prevented from contacting one another until 2018. The duo sent in appeals for a mistrial, and honestly, with all of the misconduct, I'm surprised they weren't granted one. The California Supreme Court once again upheld the ruling, and it was decided in 1998 that without new evidence, the brothers would not be entitled to more appeals. The new evidence that earned the brothers resentencing came out in 2023. Peacock released a 3-episode docuseries called Boys Betrayed. The first episode of the series features Roy Roseo telling his story. Roseo claims that while he was signed on to the Latin boy band Muendo, Jose had raped him. Thanks to Ray's allegations, the state of California decided it was time for the brothers to be resentenced. An announcement was made in 2024 that the brothers would be eligible for resentencing given the new evidence for their case, and the former LA District Attorney had set for it to happen at the end of the year. However, there was a change of office in December of 2024, and Nathan Hochman moved into the position. Hochman asked the mayor for an extension so that he could thoroughly review the case file, and this extension has been granted. The resentencing hearing is now scheduled for January 30th, 2025. Jose's family continues to advocate for Lyle and Erik's release. By all accounts, they've been model prisoners since their official sentence was handed down in 1996. Erik's wife, Tammy, also advocates for the release of her husband. The two met through a pen pal program and would marry in 1999. Lyle married Rebecca Sneed in 2003, but the couple has since separated. And that, my friends, is the case of the Menendez brothers. This case was full of unexpected twists. I can easily see why it was so scandalous when the original trial aired on court TV. Erik was 18 at the time of the murder, and Lyle was only 21. Currently, they are both housed at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in California. Lyle is now 56 and Erik is 54. Personally, I believe that Lyle and Erik are where they belong. When it comes to allegations of abuse, I tend to fall on the side of believing the victims. Even so, having a shitty life doesn't give you a free pass to be a shitty person, especially in this case. Lyle and Erik had the resources to deal with their stress, and they were both actively in therapy at the time of the murders. And coming from a wealthy family, they definitely had the means to get away. Additionally, the shopping spree and the sheer amount of money they spent in 6 months before their arrest really drives home the prosecution's argument for me between the tapes provided by Ozell and Signorelli, the screenplay, and the endless lies. I believe that the motive for this murder was greed, especially when you realize that Jose and Kitty were considering writing their sons out of their will altogether. I agree that Kitty and Jose were shitty people and shitty parents, but I don't think they necessarily deserve to die. But many people believe that they got what was coming to them. Even if you discount the murders, though, they managed to raise some pretty shitty kids. We assume that Jose did molest his sons and Kitty knew about it. I can see where and why the brothers were enraged. However, all of the lying, the screenplay, their overall attitudes towards money and consequence, and their pattern of this type of behavior makes it hard to believe that this was a crime of passion. I mean, they bought the weapons just 12 days before the murders and used a fake ID to get them. They were smart, and it doesn't really get more pre-planned than that. But even if they hadn't been convicted of murder, I think we would have heard about one or both of them being arrested eventually. Both brothers had a temper in their youth, and both had already been caught engaging in illegal activity. I also think that if they were to be released, they'd eventually sort to like some kind of white-collar crime to make up for the life of luxury that they've missed out on. Like, they'd embezzle or whatever mediocre middle-aged men do. I don't know, but I have a feeling that they'd be getting up to something to land them right back in jail, you know? The amount of scandal and twists involved with this case absolutely blew my mind. What are your thoughts? Do you think they should be resentenced? What outcome are you hoping for? Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back soon with the Delphi murders case. I will be posting my giveaway on Facebook this Saturday, so please be sure to check it out and come interact with me and have a chance to win something cool from your new favorite podcaster, maybe? Remember to choose kindness where you can and stay crafty. Thank you so much.